You are listening to Talky Bnonnsense, a grab bag of bonus discussions short and long about issues small and large. And today we have issues both small and large to discuss because we want to talk about things that we recommend. This sounds like a very silly and boring topic, but it's not. It's actually very interesting.
We will see. Things we endorse. And I will begin on a very practical note. Separate laundry. And I'm pretty sure I came across this idea online. So you know how laundry is a hideous, never-ending task?
I do.
Yeah, well, it turns out an awful lot of that, I think sort of 90% of that, apparently, time-wise, is the sorting out. And sorting is hard, especially if you have a lot of children, and especially if they're close in age and of the same sex, and you do hand-me-downs, and you just can't for the life of you remember whether this shirt still belongs to boy number 2 or boy number 3. So very simply, what you do is, each member of the family has a hamper. It doesn't need to be as big as a regular hamper because only one person's clothes are going in it. For the boys, we use those flexible round plastic tubs with the handles. Then everybody washes their laundry separately. And incidentally, the kids can do this. Our 6-year-old does it. It's 2 buttons on the machine and he has a little stool to stand on to get the clothes out. And this way, there is no sorting. And it's brilliant. Now, occasionally you might...
And also, kids learn to take responsibility for their own things.
Well, that too. And occasionally you might want to put on 2 loads at once because otherwise, it'll be 2 little titchy loads and that seems wasteful. And you can do that. You just want to make sure you put in, say, daddy's clothes in with the baby's clothes, not the 7-year-old boy's clothes in with the 6-year-old boy's clothes. And that way you can spend no brain power at all figuring out whose stuff is whose. So I am by no means a model housekeeper, but this is one thing that really works and has made life less stressful, and you should do it.
Yes, you should.
Right. Non, what do you recommend?
I recommend EDC, which stands for Everyday Carry, an acronym that all people ought to know, but apparently do not. EDC differs between men and women and tends to be a much more man-oriented obsession, hobby, interest.
It tends to be a way for makers of lists for what to get your husband for Christmas to fill it out with something that isn't just a hip flask or a pair of handkerchiefs.
And you get a lot of hipster EDC websites, which I don't really recommend, but EDC fundamentally is about preparedness. It's about always having on your person some of the items that are going to be most necessary for your day-to-day life and or survival.
Being a good Boy Scout.
It is difficult for me to take seriously the masculinity of a man who does not carry a knife, a flashlight, and a way of making fire and telling the time. So in my left pocket, I have a Noctagon KR4 flashlight.
Which is very fine. Comes with a paracord.
Civivi Chevalier.
That is a little flicky knife. Not a murder flick knife, just a kind of a one-handed open...
A sheep's foot blade in order to not look like a murder knife, because in New Zealand, murder knives are very much frowned upon.
You do use it a lot, your knife. Like, that comes in handy way more often than you would think a knife would come in handy. You're always opening stuff with it.
That's because when you actually have a knife, you discover how often you use it. People need to cut things every day, and they're always like, oh, can you get me a knife? Or, have you got some scissors? Why don't you just carry a knife?
That's true. I mean, I have a knife. I carry a knife in my bag.
Yes, you have learned.
And it is useful. I even use it at work because for some reason, despite being literally a cafe, we do not have usable kitchen knives.
I also have a standard Bic lighter.
Yes.
Because they are extremely reliable. I have a...
Yeah, I tried buying you a fancier lighter. I spent hours of research looking for some really cool vintagey lighter or kind of steampunky lighter and there are gorgeous ones, there are brass ones, there are brilliantly machined ones, and they all just absolutely seep fluid. It just evaporates and you have to fill them up every 2 weeks or something. And I was sad to hear it, but basically you just cannot get better than a Bic lighter.
The only thing that Bic needs to do is use post-mill materials.
Yeah, if I made them pretty, that would be nice. You can get covers for them.
You can. I have a cover that someone sort of forged, but
oh really?
It's not really worth the trouble, to be honest.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah, I'll find it.
But you do know the plastics inside, so it feels a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, I also have my wallet and my car keys. I have a watch, which at the moment is not a very nice watch. It's not very post-mill, at least. It's a Casio. I forget the model number. It's like the classic resin dive watch, the really cheap one that the NASA pilots, the test pilots wear.
It looks kind of 80s-ish to me, which is not my favorite era.
The 80s, I confess, I have a slight affinity for the 80s vibe, even though I recognize that it isn't the most beautiful. And in my bag, I have a power bank and Kawakawa.
Oh, Kawakawa. People might not know about that.
Yeah, people can't get Kawakawa in America, but
It
in
is
New
a
Zealand, we have a
plant.
native plant called kawaka, which contains
Kind of numbing agents.
numbing agents.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so if you see it in the wild, you want to use the leaves that have got holes in them, because it means the insects have attacked those leaves and the plant has produced more chemicals as a response to the attack, and so they're kind of the more medicinal leaves. I have made a tea out of it, and it does make your tongue numb, which honestly isn't much of a plus. I very rarely need a numbed tongue, but it is good in a balm for soothing cuts and scrapes and
I mostly use
sunburn,
it
I guess.
for if I'm out somewhere where there are bugs that are biting.
Oh, an insect repellent.
It's not as much a repellent as
right.
if they bite me, it doesn't itch anymore.
Okay, fair enough. Pain relief.
But just kind
actually,
of general mild pain relief.
You do
slash.
You do carry pain relief as well, don't you?
I do. I have some ibuprofen, and I've also got some hay fever medication.
Yeah.
I have a bunch of like little medical things in my bag, as well as my power bank and a couple of milking gloves.
Yes. Have they ever come in?
Like they're just medical gloves, really.
Yeah, like nitrile gloves.
Yeah, every now and then you'll come across something where you're like, oh man,
Something too
I
horrible
want
to
to not be
contemplate.
touching that. Yeah.
Actually, in the car we have a lot. You have a very good ED stock in the car. We've got the first aid kit. You've got duct tape galore, which we increasingly need to keep our car intact. Our car may be mostly duct tape at this point.
All of my vehicles have been primarily held together by duct tape.
Yeah. What else do we keep? Wet wipes, obviously. Wet wipes are not just a baby thing. You should always have wet wipes. They're just a staple of life.
We've got a tow rope. We've got one of those jumpstart kits that has the power bank in it that you can just use the power bank to jumpstart a car.
Yes, which is a wonderful way to make your husband feel very manly, it seems, when he owns one of these.
Yep. And the rare occasion that someone's battery dies still.
Yep, you can leap into action. And
we also have a flashlight, spare flashlight.
we have a lot of torches, actually. We're a 6-person household,
torches in
and
New Zealand.
we have how many torches? Including a nice one.
I
that's
previously carried a Workhos, I think it's pronounced Workhos TS10, which was an excellent little flashlight, but it's too small and doesn't last long enough. So I gave it to Smokey to put in her bag for her EDC.
I tend to inherit your EDC as you upgrade, actually. So I actually have a decent set in my bag.
But you also have your own things.
I have my own things. I have
woman
sewing,
EDC.
Yeah. I have my sewing kit. You know, Miriam, my sister, growing up, always used to keep a safety pin in the hem of her dress. And I don't know how often it came in handy, but it was...
I think that's a classic woman EDC thing.
Normal, yeah.
And just the other day, I used nail clippers that you keep in your bag.
I did, yeah. I mean, lip balm, obviously.
My toenails were hurting me.
Yes,
I'm
thank you.
a silly man.
I'm sure
who doesn't
we'd all love to
do
hear
anything
about
about his toenails until they start hurting him on a walk.
Yeah. Lovely. What else do I have? I'm trying to remember.
Salt.
Oh, yeah. Yes, a small container.
This is like a separate recommendation in its own right. Salt and straws.
Salt and straws, yeah. Okay, so I don't like the whole paper straws thing because they...
Let the records say
a shudder
that
run down my spine.
Smokey wildly understates her loathing.
Paper straws.
Our shared loathing for paper straws.
I mean, I understand that plastic straws kill the sea turtles, and that is very sad, but paper straws are not the answer.
I also understand that they have almost zero impact on the turtles compared to all the other plastics that no one is banning.
Yeah, well, that's as may be, but the point is, there is a third way, a better way. I did the metal straw thing for a while, and that was it was okay. But borosilicate glass straws, we have discovered, they have a very pleasant mouthfeel. And
you can see inside them, which is more than can be said about metal straws. When you look down them, you're like, ooh, what is in there?
Yeah, like just not quite round anymore. And they come in various widths. I actually have various widths because I was trying to buy wide ones for Boba Tea, and they kept sending me ones that were not as wide. It sounds like they'd shatter in your mouth and cause hemorrhaging, but
well, probably only if you chomp them.
I mean,
have you been chomping them experimentally?
Because I am aware that they're glass. I don't know what borosilicate even means in terms of glassware. I think it's what they use for the scientific instruments, isn't it? Like, you know, the flasks and the flagons and so on.
Probably just so it's heat resistant or something. I don't know.
Maybe. Anyway, so if you get them, don't chomp them. But bearing that in mind, they're very nice. And yes, salt. I have a little thing. It's like one of those plastic lip balm containers, and it's full of salt. And you would be surprised how often you run into a mediocre French fry situation, and it comes in really handy. Rowan mocked me when I started carrying salt, and what's happened several times, she has asked to borrow the salt when we were out. It is useful.
Indeed. So that's EDC. If you're not currently doing it, start doing it, lest you be found wanting.
I was doing soy sauce too, but it leaked.
Yeah. What else do you recommend, Smokey?
I recommend Elizabeth Goudge, who, having said this, I have, read this woman my entire life. I don't actually know for sure that it's pronounced Goudge. It could be Gouge. Goudge. I think it's Goudge. Elizabeth Goudge is an author whose books I always find at secondhand bookstores, and yet I have virtually never met anyone who has read her. So she must be famous, and yet she's criminally underrated. Very, very strange situation. And I think she should be right up there with the classics. I think she's amazing, and she's particularly true magic-y. So she had a fairly unexciting life. She was born in 1900, lived till 1984, and her father was a learned theological guy. He ended up being the professor of divinity at Oxford University. And Elizabeth grew up sort of surrounded by beautiful towers and colleges and history and myths and legends, and was just in a very rarefied cultural air. Now, she never married. She, for a while, was actually teaching design and handcrafts at Oxford, until her father died, and then she and her mother moved to Devon, and then after her mother died later, she moved to Oxfordshire. So it was a fairly circumscribed life.
I believe it's pronounced Oxfordshire.
Is it?
One of us has just committed a terrible faux pas in Britain.
Well, just look it up, make sure.
No, it's more interesting this way.
Wow. Okay. The shire surrounding Oxford, in which she lived, was fairly uneventful, but she was surrounded by very lovely natural beauties and lots of culture, and these sort of strongly influenced her work. And she was astoundingly prolific. So I grew up reading her books, and I thought I must have sort of read at least the highlights. Like, I must have done most of them. Turns out I haven't. I found tons more. She wrote an autobiography, a couple of religious books, including one about Francis of Assisi, and several children's books. But mostly she wrote novels. During her lifetime, she was, fairly but not astoundingly popular. Her most well-received book is The Little White Horse, which you have read to the children. It won the Carnegie Medal. Apparently, J.K. Rowling considers this one of her favourite books, and she's gone so far as to call Elizabeth Goudge a direct influence on Harry Potter, which I have to say I cannot see at all. I like Harry Potter, I like Elizabeth Goudge, I see no spiritual parentage there whatsoever, but okay. Her other moment of fame was for Green Dolphin Country, which is this delightfully melodramatic epic that is partly set in New Zealand, and was actually made into a movie called Green Dolphin Street, which I haven't seen. I believe it's not the most faithful adaptation ever to grace the screen, but the book is just cracking. You should read it. Since her death, she seems to have gradually fallen from view, except for this really weird incident in 1993. So this was 9 years after her death. Way back in 1956, she'd written a book called The Rosemary Tree, which I haven't read that one. It wasn't her most major work, and it didn't get terribly good reviews. It was considered a little bit sort of sappy and saccharine. But then in 1993, this book popped up by an Indian author, Indrani Aikath Gyaltsen, or a word pronounced somewhat like that. It was her second novel, and it was called Crane's Morning. It was set in an Indian village, had Indian names, talked a fair bit about Hinduism, and people loved it. The New York Times, which had given The Rosemary Tree a mediocre review, gave Crane's Morning a really good review. Until a month later, when somebody pointed out that it was the same book. She had straight up changed the names and the setting and the religion and published it as her own, but same dialogue, everything. Very, very clear plagiarism. So there was a big scandal, and shortly after that, I'm afraid, she poisoned herself and died.
So why is Elizabeth Goudge true magic-y?
Well, for one thing, she does not despise the day of small things. I really like this about her. Her books are often set during various historical periods, and occasionally a genuine historic event will come up. But those tend not to be the most momentous parts of her books. She has a healthy appreciation for spiritual struggle. And she recognises that the making or ruin of a soul can come down both to a constant, perpetual, mundane grind, like showing patience towards a spouse that you're inclined to despise, or on occasion to single moments of decision and grit. There is, for example, one quite dramatic scene in one of her books where it all comes down to an elderly woman who has achieved many great things in her life, choosing to be kind one more time in a crisis to her daughter-in-law, whom she quite justifiably loathes. It's not the first time she's had to be kind to her. It's not even that she always finds it tremendously difficult. It's just this one spiritual attack, and Goudge portrays it as momentous. And this is a common theme in her books. She doesn't despise the domestic. Some of the decisions people have to make are fairly big drama, like, deciding not to commit suicide. But a lot of them are really understated. The things like a woman deciding to try to love her children instead of just pretending she loves them. Or a man deciding to try to reconnect with the world instead of keeping to himself. Or a woman learning to be content taking care of her old, querulous parents. She sees these things as what they are. If you know C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce, the bit where the narrator meets this very great and splendid lady in heaven, and it turns out that on earth she'd just been this small, kindly nobody. That's the sort of thing that Elizabeth Goudge gets at. She shows the spiritual victory out of small things. Even a wonderful scene in Green Dolphin Country of an old lady in poverty who takes great pain to keep herself looking clean and respectable. It's like the whole she's so old and she's so frail that the whole struggle of her life just kind of boils down to doing these tiny things and just, keeping her clothes clean and keeping herself looking nice. And that is a legitimate, valid struggle. And the key is she does it very compellingly. It's very hard to write about virtue without coming across as, preachy and treacly and ham-fisted. It's sort of like talking about the joys of motherhood. It's very hard to do. But she does it. And a good evidence of this, I think, is that when I reread them as an adult, I keep finding myself going, oh, that's really Christian. Whereas as a child, I completely glossed over it. It's like when you reread the Anne of Green Gables series as an adult and you mostly remember, she dyed her hair green and Gilbert Blythe and so on. And then you realize it's like astonishingly specifically Presbyterian. Like the word predestination just appears more times than you can count. And yet at the time you didn't feel like you were getting a crash course in predestination. I was going to add that it's a bit like C.S. Lewis, but sometimes I think C.S. Lewis doesn't actually get it. What do you think? Having reread Narnia, do you reckon that C.S. Lewis sort of succeeds in not being obvious? I mean, obviously I know he was trying to get past the sleeping dragons, or however he put it. Do you reckon he manages?
It's difficult to say because everyone by this stage is so... Lewis is sort of the poster child for Christian allegory.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to read him without that in the back of your mind all the time. I'm kind of curious to ask Morris, who just turned 10. We just finished Dawn Treader, and at the end, Aslan says to the children how they have to learn to find him in their own world.
Yeah.
I'm curious to ask Morris what he thinks that means.
Yeah.
Like who Aslan is in our world. I don't 100% know if he's going to be able to tell me the answer.
I don't even mean so much, though, about the facts of the allegory. I mean, do you think he succeeds in making virtue not lame? C.S. Lewis talks a lot about, cant, religious cant, and how he doesn't like things that are treacly and preachy. But I think sometimes because of his middle-classy intellectual upbringing, and I suppose partly just because of the time, sometimes the things the kids say do actually sound a little bit hail fellow well met, don't you think?
Well, it's, again, difficult to kind of compared to Elizabeth Goudge because he's writing in this medieval style courtly fantasy world.
Yeah, but also a very English public school kind of world where you sort of, shake hands and do the decent thing. And occasionally I think it does veer towards the obnoxious, even though I think he was trying very hard not to.
I don't know. The times that I can think of in Dawn Treader, for instance, where virtue is particularly upheld, like when Lucy has that temptation with the book, and when Eustace has to be a dragon, and when Caspian wants to go to the end of the world, they don't feel treacly to me. The one with Caspian is maybe a bit preachy, but it sort of needs to be. I can't really comment on how it compares to Elizabeth Goudge because I've only read The Little White Horse, and that was quite a while ago now.
Yes, no, I didn't mean in comparison with her necessarily, just in general. Yeah, no. Tell us, people, dear gentle readers, what do you think? Do you reckon he does succeed? Because I know he was very conscious of it, but I also know he was of his time, and his time can sound a little bit more kind of overtly moralistic than things do today.
Potentially, it might be said that our time despises anything that even slightly resembles overt moralism.
Well, that is true.
Anywho,
moving on. Another thing I love about Elizabeth Goudge is that she very much believes in an enchanted world. She was brought up with myths and legends and fairy tales and saints' tales, and she just imbues her worlds with it very strongly, so it comes across as very deep and rich and interesting. And most of her books aren't magical. The Little White Horse is more so than some, but there is very much more than what we see on the surface of things always going on, which is lovely. But the great thing, I think, is that she writes with a genuine love of humanity. And not all great authors do this. I love Jane Austen, but while she was very perceptive about humanity, I don't think you'd necessarily say that she loved it. She was quite wry and critical. And in fact, I think being perceptive often goes hand in hand with a certain cynicism about humanity. It is very hard to both observe and love, because people tend to have a certain amount of evil and or ridiculousness in them. Lucy Maud Montgomery maybe gets halfway there. Dickens doesn't even try. I actually reckon Steinbeck gets there some of the time. There's a lot of love in The Grapes of Wrath. But he also has bad guys who he doesn't attempt to understand or love. Chesterton does it. Often the Father Brown stories, I find he tends to love everybody he writes about to some degree. And Elizabeth Goudge just really seems to love humanity, and it really shines through. So there's really anyone who's just sort of straight up evil in her books. She always digs down below the surface and finds out their damage or their motivations or some hidden spark. And there's really anyone straight up ridiculous either. because she has too much compassion to treat anyone as just a figure of fun. She is funny, and there are elements of caricature sometimes, but she'll often set up this comic character and then go deeper and show the pathos. And none of this is based on some kind of fuzzy, like everyone's lovely deep down worldview. It's more that she writes each character as a full person, and she believes that people have souls and are made in the image of God. I think it's as simple as that. And the last thing is just delightfully, because it's so rare, she loves children and she writes them so well. It's very hard to write bad children without making them unlikable brats. And it's even harder to write good children without making them kind of insufferable Elsie Dinsmore types. But she writes like someone who really knows children and delights in them, which is all the more impressive since she never married or had kids. There's a line in The Dean's Watch, which is one of my favourites, apparently also one of her favourites, in which this short-sighted old man is sitting down daydreaming and he suddenly sees a starfish on his knee, and when he peers at it, he discovers it is the hand of a small fat child who has come to say hello. It's a very delightful image. And she writes very perceptively about marriage and parenthood and sort of the charming amorality of toddlers. So if you like kids, I think you will like her. So there you go. Read Elizabeth Goodge. I would recommend Green Dolphin Country if you're up for like a big read. The Dean's Watch, as I've said, is lovely. A City of Bells, and The Elliots of Damrose Hay is a trilogy, which I also may be mispronouncing. And if you have children, The Little White Horse, also worth a read. All right, Non, what do you recommend?
I recommend something much more mundane, which is buying second-hand things.
Yes.
We have spent way too much money in our former years, not because of you.
Yes, we.
I have spent way too much of our money in our former years buying new things that could just as easily have been bought secondhand, or very nearly as easily. Not everything lends itself to secondhand buying. In fact, a lot of the EDC stuff that I buy is pretty much firsthand. I'm currently looking for a secondhand watch because watches are really expensive, but it's hard to find that kind of thing secondhand.
I'm looking for a Soviet
specific
watch.
Yes, I know you are.
Yes, I want a watch where you can set a little timer so that after an hour of mucking around, it will beep and remind you that you should be doing useful things.
Go ding.
Or go ding, that's fine. Ding is fine. It turns out nobody makes those unless you buy like a $30,000 one, except the Soviets did for a bit, like back in the day.
Yeah,
Why?
Between like the 60s and the 90s.
Yeah, and some of them are quite cute too.
Yeah. Anyway, I recommend buying secondhand tools if you can, except for table saws. Don't buy a secondhand table saw.
We have not had good luck with
There's usually a reason that they're selling it. And it's not because they've upgraded, it's because the damn thing sucks. So buy a first-hand table saw, but buy second-hand...
chisels and...
Yeah, especially hand tools, actually. If you can get
planes.
Old ones, they're almost invariably way better than new ones with their cheap Chinese steel and garbage and so on. What
Furniture.
else? Yeah, furniture.
Clothes.
I very seldom buy new clothes. The only real new clothes I buy would be sometimes shoes, underwear, obviously, and sometimes jackets. But even then, the jackets I'll buy on major special because jackets are expensive.
Yeah. Books. I mean, if you're buying...
Obviously books.
Classics especially, they're everywhere. You can find them for, 50 cents at a book sale.
Cars. Vehicles.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
only a moron buys a new car. No offense, readers. Bicycles.
Camping gear, anything that belongs to a hobby which someone else may have discarded.
Lots of those.
Just basically, if you want to buy anything, see...
And the more expensive it
available
is,
first.
the more worthwhile it is to investigate whether you can get it secondhand.
Yeah. Wedding dresses, apparently people are buying and selling like hotcakes at the moment all over the place. I didn't think of that when I got mine, although my mother made my wedding dress.
Very few people buy new houses.
So I am going to recommend Cetera, which is... I'm sort of going to recommend this. We have been actually trying to get our children away from learning on screens because it's probably bad for their brains. But one of the most annoying things about getting your kids to learn anything from a screen is that they tend to have these stupid games that are like heavily gamified. Like you can't just do a quiz where it says, what's 2 times 2? Now what's 2 times 4? It says, what's 2 times 2? And then when you get it right, it has a little animation with music and little, starfish dances for 5 minutes or something. And it's infuriating and a waste of time. So Cetera...
And messes with your brain.
So Cetera is a map quiz site. It's also known as GeoGuessr. It says Cetera up the top, and then it's called geoguessr.com, so I don't even know what's going on there.
GeoGuessr.com.
You'll find it. And it does the countries, the flags, and the capitals of every continent. You can do the states, flags, and capitals of all the US states. You can do New Zealand regions and cities. Just they have all those kinds of things. They also have a science quizzes section that mostly teaches about human anatomy, so all the bones, all the muscles, all the parts of the eye. And the nice thing about it is it's just pretty straightforward. You click it, I think it gives you a couple of chances. You get it wrong, you get it right. It moves on. It doesn't make a big fuss. You can actually learn things quite efficiently. And actually, our kids are brilliant at geography now, which I never was, so I'm pleased about that. Lockie just learned, he's just about to turn 7. I was like, I'll start him off, and he has now learned all these continents and all of the North American and nearly all of the South American countries quite fast. I was impressed.
Our 10-year-old and our 14-year-old were mocking me just this morning about
the location of Cyprus, wasn't it?
The location of, I thought Spain was Anatolia. Turns out Anatolia is Greece.
Huh.
And they were like, it's right above Cyprus. How could you think that was Spain? Spain's way off in the west. And I was like, I don't know. I'm an idiot.
I have been trying to teach myself Europe just because I felt so ashamed of knowing so much.
Sort of didn't know that, but I hadn't really thought.
Honestly, Europe is harder than you'd think. It has a lot of countries which I'm pretty sure are made up.
Yeah.
Like one of them has got to be Genovia. Anyway.
A bunch of them just sound like Hollywood countries that were made up for the sake of not offending someone.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Nonny.
I'm going to return somewhat to the theme of secondhand and sort of expand upon it a little bit by saying that one of the things that's really worthwhile to do is figuring out how to get the best value rather than the best quality or the best price. People, in my experience, and this is how I've tended to think as well, either you go for the cheapest possible thing because you just want to save as much money as possible, or you go for the best quality thing, which turns out to be not necessarily the most expensive. You don't think, well, I need the absolute tippy-top flagship product, but you tend to think, well, I need something really, really good. This is especially when it came to buying tools, I found. I thought, well, I'm not going to get the cheapest tool because that's going to suck. It's going to break. So I'll go out and get like a really expensive one and make sure that it'll last forever. I do
reckon this is a male tendency, just saying.
Yeah, it probably is. It's an ego thing. It turns out that buying the most expensive tools that you can get, or even not the most expensive, but just really good ones, is actually almost always pointless. Because as a rule, unless you're going into it as a profession, in which case I'm not speaking to you, you're going to use the tool less than you'd like to think you are.
That is true.
And it's going to be good enough, no matter how good you get.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of like motorbikes. All these guys buy these super high-end leader bikes that were basically designed for racing on the track, and almost none of them take them on the track. And the bike is, 900% more capable than they ever will be. So this applies to tools, I like to do it with knives and headphones and flashlights as well. Like that's how I got my KG4. That seemed like a really good value. It was like $100 and something, but it has all of the features that I want and it's really powerful. And
you were referring to a flashlight in this case?
Yes.
A KG4, okay.
Yes.
Wow, you spent $100 on a flashlight?
Yeah.
Okay, see this is the difference between men and women.
And, headphones. Here I've got my Superlux HD 330s, which are basically beyerdynamics, but only about 1/10 of the cost.
Sure.
Yep.
Keyboards? Actually, looking at your keyboard here.
Technically, yes.
This is a nice keyboard.
This is a very expensive keyboard, but it's actually less expensive than a lot of the other things like the Kinesis and so on that are way more mainstream, but actually suck way more as well. So I've got here a Keyboardio, an M100, Model 100, which is just a really, really nice keyboard to type on. The only keyboard that I know of that has palm keys, which are a game changer, especially for coding, and was considerably cheaper than a Kinesis. I think they're called Kinesis. There are a bunch of others as well. I can't remember the names because I don't really care.
And it has a wooden, I want to say a chassis?
Yeah, it's got a wooden casing enclosure thing. Yeah. I don't really like the woodenness of it. That's actually something we were talking about the other day.
I do like the woodenness. But
the questionability of using, the fittingness of a substance or material to the task that it's being used for.
Yes.
It seems to me that wood is not very fitting for a computer because it doesn't really match what the computer is. The telos of the computer and the telos of the wood don't match up.
Well, with your particular keyboard, I don't mind the wood. I just think that the wood with the black plastic keys isn't good. There should be brass keys or something kind of...
Yeah.
Like, pick a lane.
No, I would like it to be just a nice plain black aluminium like the Atrius that I have. That's a really nice keyboard. A solid black base. The keys just stick up off it and doesn't get all filthy inside because there is no inside, and it has a really good clicky feel because the base captures all of the feedback. This thing's a little bit boomy and you kind of has a weird resonance because of the casing.
Well, alrighty then.
That was a bit of a tangent.
A little bit. Okay, so my recommendation also, hyaluronic acid. Not for purposes of murder. This is a very gentle acid, don't worry. Basically, I have never had dry skin until now. I don't know if it's my rapidly advancing age or the fact that it's winter, but suddenly my skin was dry, and it turns out that's not fun. You put moisturizer on it, it just feels dry still. It's bizarre. Even when it's wet, it's dry. I'm not used to this, don't like it. So I looked it up, and man, if you ever wondered why there aren't more women in STEM, it's because they're all on beauty forums doing, like, complicated biochemical analyses on each other's skin. I learned a lot, and I was like, there's a lot more I could learn, but I don't care. I just wanted something to make my face feel like living skin again. Turns out my moisturizer that I do wear, because I know enough to know you're supposed to put moisturizer on, so I have a day cream and a night cream. I was using primarily occlusives, so these are just like a barrier of oil that traps existing moisture against the skin. Like if you have a jar of water and you put a little thin layer of oil on top, the water will evaporate much less quickly than if it didn't have oil, okay? So if you apply these while your skin is still wet from a shower, or, you wash your face and then put them on, they do some good, but if you put them on dry skin, they do virtually nothing. And I did know that, so I was putting it on where it just wasn't really helping. But what I wanted, it turns out, was a humectant, which actually attracts moisture into the skin, and hyaluronic acid is a humectant. And I went to Kmart and bought the cheapest thing I could hastily grab off the shelf because we were in a hurry that said hyaluronic acid on it. It was like $7, like dodgy as heck. But from the very first day, it worked. My skin feels like skin again. This may be useful to someone.
Probably causing cancer with all the extra chemicals, but at least your skin feels good as it gets cancer.
Yeah. All right. Carrying on. Back to you.
My next recommendation, my penultimate recommendation, is writing things down in a notebook in order to get things done. I have tried literally every task management system ever designed, especially computer-based ones, largely not just for the sake of managing my own life, but managing projects, because I am a freelancer. I do lots of work for people. I have different clients. And it turns out that pretty much none of them actually work as you would hope. You spend way more time managing the system than managing the tasks. And ultimately, you end up paring things down into simpler and simpler methods until eventually you land back at paper. So I now have a system for managing tasks where basically everything just goes into my notebook, and I have tasks that I have little square boxes next to every day for things I have to do. I tick them off as I go, and if they don't get done on the day, they go on to the next day until they get done. And I have a little backlog every month, and each month I create a new backlog so that I'm keeping up to date. And if there are extra things that I can't really keep in a notebook easily, or if I have computer-based tasks for clients, I will track the daily stuff that I have to do, and I will just have a simple checklist in Obsidian, which is my knowledge management system, and I will just have a page for each. It's basically just a text document with a list of items that needs to be done for each client, for each project. In other words, don't get overly complicated. What about you, Smokey? You have a final recommendation for us?
I do, and this is one that just occasionally comes to mind when I read Christian stuff about marriage, because there seems to be just a wee bit of a focus on kind of it not really mattering much who you choose, sort of like anyone will have sin and be hard to live with, and as long as your goals are aligned and so on, just kind of pick someone and stick to it. And I get that to a degree, but I think maybe some young Christians need to hear that you should also marry someone you like. So this is my recommendation. Marry someone you actually like and want to spend time with and want to hang out with more than you want to hang out with other people, including your guy friends. Someone whose sense of humor you do not find obnoxious or feel that you will have to apologize for the rest of time, someone whose personal habits don't drive you up the wall. People say sex is the glue that holds a marriage together, and kind of yes, but also I think liking is very much there. And, there are times where you see couples who have been married successfully for a long time but who don't seem to like each other, and it just seems like that is such a waste because you spend a lot of your life with someone. You may as well actually enjoy that person's company.
What was the point of this exactly? Why is it that you've decided to get into this relationship which seems to be fundamentally about enjoying each other when you don't really seem to enjoy each other?
Yeah, like we've noticed this sometimes, haven't we?
Yeah.
It's weird.
It is weird.
I think we've been through a lot of things that would have been a lot harder to get through if we hadn't actually liked each other.
Yeah, very much so.
Well, that was it.
Right.
For me.
My
last one.
Final recommendation is sort of meta.
Okay.
It kind of encapsulates this episode to some extent. It's making an effort to learn and remember things that are outside your direct skill set and interests, things that aren't related to your job or even necessarily to your hobbies. So, for instance, one of the things that we enjoy doing sometimes is watching Business Insider documentaries, which are about all kinds of random things. They're tied together by themes like why are things so expensive or...
Yeah, businesses that are still standing, even though they're based on traditional methods that should have sort of become obsolete. So it's everything from people who make teacups to fake flowers to running a soy sauce artisan factory with 3 people in it in Japan.
Yes, those kinds of things are very interesting. They don't teach me anything that actually directly influences or aids in the work that I do. It doesn't help me write sermons. It doesn't help me create websites. It doesn't help me write email copy. But it helps me, and this is by no means the only example. Like I also watch Low Level Learning, for instance, which is a YouTube channel dedicated to computer security, which I know very little about and only vaguely understand, even though I am familiar with development. The concepts that he talks about are way over my head. But I find it helpful to not be snobby about, like, I'm not into that, or that's for girls, that's for guys. Like, I've watched lots of videos that you'd have enjoyed about making clothing, for instance.
Yeah.
Which is not my thing.
I mean, from this podcast, actually, you've probably learned a lot about historical
Well,
fashion
indeed.
that you wouldn't otherwise have done. So I guess it was kind of useful in the end, but yeah.
But everything is interesting if you love knowledge. I'm not talking about being multidisciplinary or cultivating basic skills in lots of areas. It's obviously good to do those things too, but I think this is more about understanding as much as possible about how the whole world works, even the bits that you have nothing to do with and have nothing to do with you. Because insight and creativity are what currently separate us from AI and always will. And these are things that are fundamentally about being able to draw connections that haven't been drawn before. So the more ideas you have in your mind, the more you understand about everything, the more connections you can see and the more connections you can draw, and the more deeply you understand even the things that you have a particular interest in. And you're able to draw out connections there because of being able to see how they relate to other things that other people can't see. So that's my final recommendation.
There are probably more things we recommend in life. But for now, this is what we got.
I think it's safe to say that there are more things.
Custard squares.
For instance.
Babies.
Chocolate.
Manatees.
But these are the ones that seem particularly interesting to us and which came to mind. If you would like to discuss them, we have a Signal group, and you can join that group for the princely sum of $7 a month by going to truemagic.nz and following your nose. But until next time, this has been Talky Bnonnsense.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.